The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets of Meadowbrook, a small suburban neighborhood tucked away in the northern reaches of Colorado Springs. Marcus Cole stood on his front porch, a steaming cup of black coffee in his calloused hands, watching the autumn leaves drift lazily from the old oak tree that had stood in his yard for longer than anyone in the neighborhood could remember. The air carried that crisp October chill that always reminded him of nights spent in the mountains during training exercises, back when his life had purpose, back when he knew exactly who he was. At 42 years old, Marcus had the kind of face that told stories without saying a word. Deep lines etched around his grey eyes spoke of sleepless nights and memories that refused to fade. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, a habit from his 20 years in the Navy that he couldn't quite shake, even now, 3 years after his medical discharge. A shrapnel wound to his left leg had ended his career as a SEAL, but the physical injury was nothing compared to the invisible wounds he carried inside. He took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the bitter warmth spread through his chest. The neighborhood was peaceful, almost unnaturally so. That was why he'd chosen it. After everything he'd seen, everything he'd done in the service of his country, Marcus craved nothing more than silence. He wanted to disappear into the mundane rhythms of civilian life, to become just another face in the crowd, another retired veteran trying to figure out what came next. His house was modest, a single-story ranch with faded blue siding and a yard that needed more attention than he gave it. The interior was sparse, almost military in its simplicity. A worn leather couch faced a television he rarely turned on, a bookshelf lined with history books and dog-eared paperback thrillers, a kitchen with exactly one of everything because he only ever cooked for himself. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph near the hallway, one that he walked past every day without looking at, one that showed him standing with his team in Afghanistan, all of them smiling, all of them alive, none of them knowing that 6 months later, half of them would be gone. Marcus had moved to Meadowbrook 18 months ago, and in that time, he'd spoken to his neighbors exactly as much as necessary. There was Mrs. Patterson across the street, a widow in her 70s who brought him homemade cookies at Christmas that he accepted with awkward gratitude. There was the young couple next door, the Hendersons, who had a baby that cried at night and a dog that barked at squirrels. And then there were the others, the ones he saw in passing but never really saw, the families and individuals who lived their lives parallel to his without ever truly intersecting. That was how he liked it. Simple, quiet, safe. He was about to go back inside, to return to the book he'd been reading and the solitude he'd cultivated like a garden when he heard it. At first, it was just a sound, indistinct and easily ignored. But something in Marcus's training, something that had been drilled into him through years of operating in hostile environments, made him pause. His body went still, his senses sharpening in that automatic way that never really went away. The sound came again, closer now, running footsteps, small and frantic, slapping against the concrete sidewalk with desperate urgency. Marcus set his coffee cup down on the porch railing and stepped forward, his eyes scanning the street. That was when he saw her. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sprinting down the sidewalk as if her life depended on it. Her dark hair was tangled and wild, streaming behind her like a flag. Her face was red and streaked with tears, her mouth open in gasping sobs that seemed to tear themselves from her chest. She was heading straight for him. Marcus felt something shift inside him, some dormant instinct rising to the surface. He moved down the porch steps, his bad leg protesting with a familiar ache that he ignored. The girl saw him and somehow ran faster, her small body propelling itself forward with single-minded determination. She reached his yard and didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't hesitate. She ran directly to him and threw herself against his legs, her small arms wrapping around him with surprising strength. Her whole body was shaking, trembling with fear and exhaustion. and something else, something that made Marcus's stomach tighten with cold recognition. "Please," she gasped, her voice breaking on the word. "Please, you have to help. They're hitting my mom. They're hurting her. Please, you have to come, please." Marcus looked down at the top of her head, at the tangled dark hair and the small shoulders heaving with sobs, and he felt the world narrow to a single point of focus, the quiet retirement he'd built, the careful distance he'd maintained, the walls he'd erected around himself. All of it suddenly felt paper-thin, irrelevant, unimportant. "Hey," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat and tried again, softer this time. "Hey, look at me." The girl tilted her face up, and Marcus saw eyes the color of dark honey, swimming with tears and terror. Her cheeks were flushed, her lower lip trembling. There was a small scrape on her chin, fresh enough to still be bleeding, probably from falling during her desperate run. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice calm and steady, the same tone he'd used countless times to talk to civilians in war zones, to reassure the frightened and comfort the wounded. "Sophia," the girl managed. "Sophia Reyes." "Okay, Sophia, I'm Marcus. I need you to take a deep breath for me. Can you do that?" Sophia nodded and sucked in a shaky breath, her small chest expanding with the effort. "Good. That's good. Now tell me what's happening. Where's your mum?" "At home," Sophia said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My mum's boyfriend, Derek, he came home angry. He's been drinking. He started yelling at her. And then he started hitting her, and she told me to run. She told me to get help, and I didn't know where to go, but I saw you on your porch sometimes, and you looked like you could help, like you weren't afraid of anything, and please, please, you have to help her. He's going to kill her. I know he is. Please." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. His hands, which had been hanging at his sides, curled into fists before he consciously relaxed them. The familiar cold focus of operational thinking settled over him like a second skin. "Where do you live, Sophia?" "3 houses down," she said, pointing back the way she'd come. "The yellow house with the broken fence." Marcus knew the house. He'd passed it dozens of times on his walks around the neighborhood. He'd noticed the signs without really registering them. The way the grass was always a little too long, the way the curtains were always drawn, the way the woman who lived there, a pretty Hispanic woman with sad eyes, always seemed to be looking over her shoulder. He should have paid more attention. He should have seen it. "Stay here," he told Sophia, his voice firm but gentle. "I want you to go up on my porch and sit on the chair by the door. Don't move until I come back for you. Do you understand?" Sophia shook her head frantically. "No, I want to come with you. I want to help my mom. The best way you can help your mom is by staying safe. If you're safe, she doesn't have to worry about you. Can you be brave for me, Sophia?" The girl looked up at him with those terrified, honey-colored eyes, and something in her expression shifted. She nodded slowly, reluctantly. "Good girl. Go sit on the porch. I'll be back." Sophia released her grip on his legs and walked toward the porch, her small shoulders hunched with fear and worry. Marcus watched her climb the steps and settle into the worn wooden chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Then he turned and started walking toward the yellow house with the broken fence. His stride was purposeful but not rushed. He'd learned long ago that running into a situation without thinking got people killed. As he walked, he assessed what he knew. One male aggressor, potentially intoxicated, currently engaged in domestic violence. One female victim. No weapons mentioned, but that didn't mean there weren't any. The aggressor would be emotionally volatile, unpredictable, dangerous. Marcus reached the property and paused at the broken fence, taking in the scene. The house was quiet from the outside, but that didn't mean anything. The violence might have moved indoors, away from prying eyes. He noticed the front door was slightly ajar, hanging open a few inches as if someone had left in a hurry. He approached the door and listened. At first, nothing. Then, muffled sounds from somewhere inside. A man's voice, loud and angry. A woman's voice, softer, pleading. The sharp sound of something breaking. Marcus pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior of the house was dim, the curtains blocking out most of the afternoon light. The living room was cluttered with the debris of a life lived in fear, magazines scattered on the floor, a knocked-over lamp, a coffee table pushed askew. The sounds were coming from further back, from what Marcus guessed was the kitchen. He moved through the house with silent precision, his body automatically adopting the careful footwork of close-quarters combat. His bad leg ached, but he ignored it. Pain was just information, and right now it was information he didn't need. He reached the kitchen doorway and took in the scene in a single glance. A woman was on the floor, pressed against the cabinets, her arms raised to protect her face. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair and olive skin, wearing a simple blue dress that was torn at the shoulder. Blood was running from her nose, and her left eye was already swelling shut. Standing over her was a man, big and broad-shouldered, with the florid face and unsteady stance of someone who'd been drinking heavily. He had his hand raised, fingers curled into a fist, his body coiled with the kind of rage that had nowhere to go but out. "You think you can talk back to me?" The man was shouting, his words slurred but loud. "You think you have the right to question me? In my house, you're nothing, you hear me, nothing." "Please, Derek," the woman said, her voice shaking. "Please just calm down. We can talk about this. Just please calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down," Derek snarled. He drew his arm back further, preparing to strike. "That's enough." Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade. Both Derek and the woman froze, their heads turning toward the doorway where Marcus stood. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Derek's face twisted with confusion that quickly morphed into outrage. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What are you doing in my house?" "I'm your neighbor," Marcus said, his voice flat and controlled. "And I'm here to tell you that you're going to stop what you're doing, step away from her and sit down until the police arrive." Derek stared at him, his alcohol-fogged brain struggling to process this unexpected interruption. Then he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You've got to be kidding me. Some random guy walks into my house and tells me what to do? Get out. This is none of your business. I'm making it my business." Derek's laughter died. His eyes narrowed, taking in Marcus's calm demeanor, his steady stance, the way his hands hung loose at his sides but ready. "You think you're tough?" Derek said, taking a step toward Marcus. "You think you can come in here and be some kind of hero? I'll show you tough." He lunged forward, swinging a wild haymaker that might have been devastating if it had connected. But Marcus had been reading Derek's body language since the moment he entered the room, had seen the tension building in his shoulders, the shift of his weight onto his front foot. Marcus sidestepped the punch easily, moving with an economy of motion that came from years of training and combat. In the same movement, he caught Derek's arm and twisted, using the bigger man's momentum against him. Derek stumbled, off balance, and Marcus pressed his advantage. A quick sweep of his leg took Derek's feet out from under him, and then Derek was on the floor, face down, with Marcus's knee in his back and his arm twisted up at an angle that promised serious pain if he tried to resist. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice calm and conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "You're going to lie here and not move. The police are going to come. You're going to go with them peacefully, and you're never going to come near this woman or her daughter again. Do you understand?" Derek struggled for a moment, testing Marcus's hold, but the pressure on his arm increased just enough to make him gasp. "Do you understand?" Marcus repeated. "Yes," Derek ground out through clenched teeth. "Yes, I understand." "Good." Marcus looked up at the woman, who was still pressed against the cabinets, staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Ma'am, are you okay? Can you move?" She nodded slowly, as if waking from a dream. Yes, I think so." "Good. I need you to call 911. Can you do that?" She nodded again and slowly pushed herself to her feet, wincing as she moved. She found her phone on the counter where it had been knocked aside and dialed with shaking fingers. While she made the call, Marcus kept his attention on Derek, who had stopped struggling and was now lying still, breathing heavily. "You're making a big mistake," Derek said, his voice muffled against the linoleum floor. You don't know what you're getting into. I've been in worse situations than this, Marcus said. Trust me. The next several minutes felt like hours. Marcus maintained his hold on Derek, while the woman, who introduced herself as Maria, spoke to the 911 dispatcher in a voice that wavered between terror and relief. She gave the address, described the situation, confirmed that the aggressor was restrained. When she hung up, she stood in the middle of her destroyed kitchen, arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. "Sophia," she said suddenly, her eyes going wide with panic. "My daughter! Where's Sophia? I told her to run. I told her to get help." "Where is she?" "She's safe," Marcus said quickly. "She's at my house, just down the street. She's the one who came to get me." Maria let out a sob that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. "She found you? She actually found help?" "She did. She's a brave kid. She's everything to me," Maria whispered. "Everything." The police arrived 7 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulling up to the house with lights flashing but no sirens. Marcus explained the situation to the responding officers, giving a clear and concise account of what had happened. Derek was pulled to his feet, handcuffed, and led out to one of the patrol cars. He was quiet now, the fight gone out of him, replaced by a sullen resignation. An ambulance arrived shortly after, and the paramedics began assessing Maria's injuries. She had a broken nose, a possible fractured cheekbone, and multiple contusions. They wanted to take her to the hospital, but she refused to go until she could see her daughter. Marcus walked with her to his house, moving slowly to accommodate her injuries and her emotional state. Sophia was exactly where he'd left her, sitting on the porch chair with her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the street with desperate intensity. When she saw her mother coming up the walk, she let out a cry and launched herself off the porch, running across the yard to throw herself into Maria's arms. Maria caught her, pulling her close, and the two of them stood there, holding each other and crying, their bodies shaking with the release of fear and relief and love. Marcus stood apart, watching them, feeling like an intruder on a moment that wasn't meant for him. He thought about going inside, about leaving them to their reunion, but something held him in place. Maybe it was the way Sophia kept looking over her mother's shoulder at him, her honey-colored eyes bright with gratitude, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. The paramedics eventually convinced Maria to go to the hospital. One of the police officers, a woman named Detective Sarah Chen, who had arrived to take statements, arranged for Sophia to go with her mother in the ambulance. Before they left, Maria approached Marcus, her face a mess of tears and bruises, but her eyes clear and focused. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking on the words. "Thank you for helping us. Thank you for coming when she asked. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. I don't want to know." Marcus nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude, unsure how to respond. Anyone would have done the same. Maria shook her head. "No, they wouldn't. I've lived on this street for 3 years. Everyone knew what was happening. They had to know. But nobody ever did anything. You're the first person who ever stepped up, the first person who ever tried to help." She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it with a strength that surprised him. "Thank you," she said again. Then she turned and walked to the ambulance where Sophia was waiting. Sophia leaned out the back of the ambulance and waved at Marcus, a small, tentative gesture that felt like a promise. Then the doors closed, and the ambulance pulled away, its lights flashing in the fading afternoon light. Marcus stood in his yard and watched it go. Then he looked down at his hands, which were steady, and felt something inside him shift, something he couldn't quite name. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he might actually be useful for something. The days that followed were strange for Marcus, filled with a kind of activity he hadn't experienced since his discharge. Detective Chen came by twice to take additional statements and to fill him in on the progress of the case. Derek had been charged with aggravated assault and domestic battery. Given his history, including 2 prior arrests for similar offenses that Maria had never reported, the district attorney was confident they could secure a conviction. Maria and Sophia had been released from the hospital and were staying with Maria's sister across town, at least until they figured out their next steps. The house on Meadowbrook Street stood empty, a silent reminder of what had happened there. The neighborhood itself had changed in subtle ways. People who had never spoken to Marcus before now nodded when they passed him on the street. Mrs. Patterson came over with another batch of cookies, but this time she stayed to talk, asking questions about what had happened and expressing her horror and sympathy. The Hendersons next door introduced themselves properly for the first time, thanking Marcus for what he'd done and apologizing for never having reached out before. "We should have done something," Mr. Henderson said, his face tight with guilt. "We heard the yelling sometimes late at night. We knew something was wrong, but we didn't want to get involved. We told ourselves it wasn't our business. What a stupid thing to think." Marcus didn't know how to respond to the sudden attention. Part of him wanted to retreat back into his shell, to close the door and return to the quiet isolation he'd cultivated. But another part of him, a part he'd thought was dead, seemed to be waking up. A week after the incident, there was a knock on his door. When Marcus opened it, he found Sophia standing on his porch, her mother a few steps behind her. Both of them looked different than they had that day, rested and calmer, though the fading bruises on Maria's face were still visible beneath carefully applied makeup. "Hi, Marcus," Sophia said, her voice bright and clear, nothing like the terrified whisper he remembered. "Can we come in? My mom wants to talk to you about something." Marcus stepped aside, gesturing them into his sparse living room. He realized with a pang of embarrassment that he had nothing to offer them, no refreshments, no comfortable place to sit, except the worn leather couch that had seen better days. Maria didn't seem to notice or care. She sat on the couch with Sophia beside her, their hands intertwined, and looked up at Marcus with an expression that was both nervous and determined. "I wanted to thank you again," she began, "and I wanted to explain some things, if you're willing to listen." Marcus lowered himself into the chair across from them, his bad leg grateful for the chance to rest. "I'm listening." Maria took a deep breath. "Derek and I were together for 2 years. It didn't start out bad. It never does, I guess. He was charming at first, attentive. He made me feel special after Sophia's father left us. But then things changed, slowly at first, so slowly I didn't even notice. He started criticizing me, telling me I was stupid, that I couldn't do anything right. Then came the yelling. And then—" She trailed off, her free hand moving unconsciously to touch her face. "I kept thinking it would get better. I kept making excuses for him. I was afraid to leave, afraid of what he would do if I tried. He always said that if I ever left him, he would find me. He would hurt me worse. He would hurt Sophia." Sophia squeezed her mother's hand, and Marcus saw the fierce, protective love in the little girl's eyes. "When he came home that day, drunk and angry, I knew it was going to be bad," Maria continued. "Worse than ever before. I saw it in his eyes. So I told Sophia to run. I didn't know if anyone would help her. I just knew I had to get her out of there, away from him. And then you came." She looked at Marcus, her dark eyes shining with unshed tears. "You have no idea what that meant, to know that someone heard her, that someone cared enough to do something. After 3 years of feeling invisible, of feeling like nobody would ever help us, you showed up." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I just did what needed to be done." "That's exactly my point," Maria said. "For you it was simple. See a problem? Fix it. But for me, for Sophia, it was a miracle. You gave us our lives back. You gave us a chance to start over." There was a long pause. Marcus didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Maria smiled, a small, tentative expression that transformed her bruised face. "That's not actually what I came here to talk about. I mean, I wanted to say thank you, yes, but there's something else." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, which she handed to Marcus. He unfolded it and found himself looking at a printed flyer, an advertisement for a community center on the other side of town. "It's a support group," Maria explained. For survivors of domestic violence. I've been going for the past week. It's helping. Being around other people who understand what it's like, who've been through the same thing. It helps you feel less alone. Marcus looked at the flyer, then back at Maria. That's great. I'm glad you found something that helps. The woman who runs it, her name is Dr. Linda Patterson. She's a psychologist who specializes in trauma. When I told her about you, about what you did for us, she was very interested. She said you sounded like exactly the kind of person who could make a difference. Marcus felt his guard go up. What does that mean? The community center has a lot of programs, Maria said. Not just support groups, but also self-defense classes, youth mentorship, life skills workshops. They're always looking for volunteers, people with experience who can teach and guide others. Dr. Patterson thought that maybe, if you were interested, you might want to get involved. Marcus stared at the flyer in his hands, his mind racing. The thought of putting himself out there, of being responsible for other people's well-being, made him want to retreat back into his shell. But there was something else too, a flicker of something that might have been interest, or maybe just curiosity. I don't know, he said slowly. I'm not exactly a people person. You were a person when it counted, Sophia said suddenly, her voice cutting through the air with the simple clarity of childhood. You were a person when I needed help. That's all that matters. Marcus looked at the little girl, at her honey-colored eyes that had seen too much but still managed to hold on to hope, and he felt something inside him crack open. I'll think about it, he said finally. Maria's smile widened. That's all I'm asking. They left shortly after, but not before Sophia surprised Marcus with a hug that wrapped around his waist with the same desperate strength she'd shown the day they met. This time, though, there was no fear in her grip, only gratitude and affection. Thank you, Marcus, she whispered against his shirt. You're a good person. He stood in his doorway long after they'd gone, the flyer still clutched in his hand, wondering if she might be right. 3 weeks later, Marcus walked through the doors of the East Side Community Center for the first time. The building was larger than he'd expected, a converted warehouse that had been transformed into a maze of rooms and open spaces, each dedicated to a different purpose. There was a gym, a kitchen, a computer lab, a child care area, and several meeting rooms where various programs took place. Dr. Linda Patterson met him at the entrance, a tall woman in her 50s, with short grey hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through him. She shook his hand with a firm grip and led him on a tour of the facility, explaining the various programs as they walked. We serve about 200 families a year, she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from years of doing difficult work. Most of them are survivors of domestic violence, but we also work with people dealing with poverty, addiction, homelessness, and other challenges. Our goal is to provide a safe space where people can heal, learn new skills, and build better lives for themselves and their children. Marcus listened, taking in the details, noting the way people moved through the space with a mixture of wariness and hope. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in the eyes of refugees and displaced families in war zones around the world, people who had lost everything but were still somehow finding the strength to keep going. Maria told me about your background, Dr. Patterson said as they walked. 20 years in the Navy, most of it as a SEAL, multiple deployments, decorated service record. Medical discharge after a combat injury. Marcus tensed slightly. She didn't have any right to share that. She didn't share details, just the broad strokes. And she wasn't trying to violate your privacy, Mr. Cole. She was trying to help me understand who you are and why you might be a good fit for what we do here. They reached a door marked Youth Program and paused. A lot of the children who come through here have experienced trauma, Dr. Patterson continued. They've witnessed violence, lived through instability, dealt with things no child should have to deal with. They need role models, Adults who can show them that strength isn't about anger or dominance, but about discipline, self-control, and protecting those who can't protect themselves. She looked at Marcus with those sharp blue eyes. You have skills and experience that could make a real difference in these kids' lives, but more importantly, you have a quality that can't be taught. Maria's daughter called it being a good person. I'd call it integrity. Either way, it's rare, and it's exactly what we need. Marcus stood there, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a mantle. He thought about Sophia, about the desperate hope in her eyes when she'd run to him for help. He thought about Maria, about the way she'd looked at him with such gratitude. He thought about his team, the men he'd served with, the ones who hadn't made it home. He'd spent 3 years trying to disappear, trying to convince himself that his useful days were behind him. But maybe that had been a mistake. Maybe running away from the world wasn't the answer. "What would you need me to do?" he asked finally. "Doctor." Patterson smiled, the first genuine smile she'd shown since they met. "Let's go talk in my office." The first few weeks at the community center were an adjustment. Marcus started with small tasks, helping to supervise the after-school program, assisting with the free meal service, doing odd jobs around the building that needed a pair of strong hands. He was awkward with the children at first, unsure how to relate to them, afraid of saying the wrong thing or scaring them with his intensity. But slowly, gradually, he found his footing. It started with a boy named Tyler, a 12-year-old with a chip on his shoulder and anger in his eyes that Marcus recognized all too well. Tyler had been through the system, bounced between foster homes, after his mother's boyfriend had put her in the hospital. He was suspicious of adults, quick to lash out, determined to push everyone away before they could hurt him. For the first few weeks, Tyler ignored Marcus completely, treating him like just another adult who would eventually abandon him. But Marcus, drawing on patience he didn't know he had, refused to be pushed away. He didn't try to force conversation or demand respect. He simply showed up, day after day, consistent and reliable, a steady presence in a world that had taught Tyler to expect nothing but chaos. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon. Tyler had gotten into a fight with another boy in the program, a scuffle that ended with both of them on the floor and the other boy crying. Dr. Patterson had intervened, separating them, and Tyler had retreated to a corner of the gym, his face dark with shame and anger. Marcus approached him slowly, giving him plenty of space. "Want to talk about it?" "No." "Okay. Mind if I sit here anyway?" Tyler shrugged, which Marcus took as permission. He lowered himself to the floor, his back against the wall, his bad legs stretched out in front of him. They sat in silence for a long time. Marcus didn't push. He just waited. Finally, Tyler spoke. He said my mom was a junkie, said she didn't want me, that's why she let her boyfriend hurt her. Said I'm gonna end up just like her. His voice was flat, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath, the raw wound that had never been given a chance to heal. "People say cruel things when they want to hurt you," Marcus said. "It doesn't make it true." "How do you know?" "You don't know anything about my mom." "No, I don't. But I know that people are complicated. I know that sometimes good people end up in bad situations because they're scared or because they don't know any other way. And I know that a person's parents don't determine who they become. You get to decide that for yourself." Tyler was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You were in the military, right?" Marcus nodded. "Did you ever kill anyone?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus considered how to answer. He could deflect, change the subject, give a non-answer designed to protect Tyler from uncomfortable truths. But something told him that this kid had heard enough non-answers in his life, enough adults who wouldn't treat him like a person capable of handling reality. "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "I did." Tyler turned to look at him, his eyes wide. "Does it bother you?" "Every day." "Then why did you do it?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to find words for something he'd never really talked about before. "Because sometimes there are situations where you have to make impossible choices. where the only options are bad ones, and you have to pick the one that's least bad. I was a soldier. My job was to protect people, to stop bad things from happening. And sometimes the only way to stop bad things is to do hard things. He looked at Tyler, meeting his eyes directly. It doesn't make me proud. It doesn't make me a hero. But I try to live in a way that honors the choices I made, by helping people when I can, by doing good when I have the chance. That's all any of us can do. Try to make tomorrow better than yesterday. Tyler was quiet for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. Okay, he said, just that. Okay. But something had shifted between them. Marcus could feel it. A bridge being built, fragile and new, but real. After that day, Tyler started seeking Marcus out. He asked questions about the military, about discipline, about how to control his anger. Marcus answered honestly, sharing what he knew, teaching what he could. He started working with Tyler on physical training, simple exercises that built strength and confidence. He taught him breathing techniques, ways to calm down when the anger started to rise. It wasn't a miracle cure. Tyler still had bad days, still struggled with his demons, but slowly, incrementally, he started to change. The chip on his shoulder didn't disappear, but it got smaller. The anger in his eyes didn't go away, but it was tempered by something else, something that looked like hope. Other children noticed the change in Tyler, and they started approaching Marcus too. He found himself surrounded by kids who wanted his attention, his advice, his time. It was overwhelming at first, exhausting in ways he hadn't expected, but it was also fulfilling in a way he hadn't felt since his days in the service. Dr. Patterson noticed the change too. "You have a gift, Marcus," she told him one evening, after the last of the children had gone home. "These kids connect with you in a way they don't connect with other adults. You make them feel safe." Marcus shook his head. "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just making it up as I go." "That's what all of us are doing," she said with a smile. "The important thing is that you keep showing up. That's what matters most to these kids. Consistency, reliability, the knowledge that there's at least one adult in their lives who isn't going to disappear." Marcus thought about that as he drove home that night, passing through the familiar streets of Meadowbrook. He thought about his own journey, from the despair and isolation of his early retirement to this new purpose he'd found. He thought about Sophia, the little girl who had run to him for help and set everything in motion. He thought about Tyler and the other kids at the center, each of them carrying wounds that would take years to heal, if they ever healed at all. He was still thinking when he pulled into his driveway and noticed a light on in his house that he was sure he'd turned off. His training kicked in immediately. He killed the engine and sat in the darkness of his car, scanning the property. The front door was closed, the windows intact. Nothing, obviously, out of place. But the light in the living room was definitely on, casting a warm glow through the curtains. He reached under his seat and pulled out the compact flashlight he kept there, a heavy metal model that could serve as a weapon if needed. Then he got out of the car, moving quietly, and approached the house. The front door was unlocked. He was certain he'd locked it when he left. Marcus pushed the door open slowly, flashlight at the ready, and stepped inside. "Hello, Marcus." The voice came from the couch. Marcus's hand tightened on the flashlight as he turned to face the speaker. A man was sitting in his living room, relaxed and comfortable, as if he belonged there. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and a weathered face, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in Marcus's sparse surroundings. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. "How did you get in here?" The man smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Victor Harrington, and I got in because I have the resources to get in anywhere I want. Please, sit down. We need to talk." Marcus didn't move. His mind was racing, trying to place the name, trying to assess the threat level. "Talk about what?" "About Derek Mills, the man you had arrested 3 weeks ago. The man who's been sitting in jail waiting for trial because you decided to play hero." The pieces started to come together. Derek, Maria, the arrest. What about him? Derek works for me, Harrington said. Or rather, he worked for me. He handled certain logistics operations on my behalf. His arrest has created complications for my business. Complications that could prove very costly. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. What kind of logistics? The kind that doesn't concern you. What does concern you is the impact your actions have had on my operations. I'm here to propose a solution. I'm not interested in any solutions you have to offer. Harrington's smile faded. You should be. Because if you're not, things could get very unpleasant for you, and for the people you've recently become so fond of. Maria Reyes and her daughter, for instance. The children at that community center you've been spending so much time at. Your neighbors. Anyone you've ever spoken to or smiled at or helped. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. I'm not a man who makes idle threats, Mr. Cole. I'm a businessman. I believe in calculated actions and predictable outcomes. Right now, the outcome I'm predicting is one where you cooperate with me, where you do exactly what I tell you to do, and where everyone you care about stays safe and healthy. The alternative outcome is considerably less pleasant for everyone involved. Marcus stood very still, his mind working through the implications of what he was hearing. Victor Harrington. The name was vaguely familiar. A local businessman, wealthy and well-connected, with interests in real estate and construction, and probably a dozen other things. The kind of man who had politicians and police officials on his payroll, who operated in the grey areas between legal and illegal, who rarely got his own hands dirty but had plenty of people willing to do it for him. What do you want me to do? Marcus asked, his voice flat. Harrington smiled again, apparently pleased by the question. First, I want you to recant your statement to the police. Say you were confused, that you misinterpreted what you saw. Without your testimony, the case against Derek falls apart. He gets released, returns to work, and my operations continue uninterrupted. And if I refuse? I told you. Things get unpleasant. I have people watching Maria Reyes right now. I know where her sister lives, what school Sophia attends, what time they leave the house in the morning. I know your schedule at the community center, the names of the children you've been working with, the addresses of their families. One word from me, and all of that becomes very, very vulnerable. Marcus felt the familiar cold focus settling over him. It was the same feeling he'd had walking into Maria's house, the same operational clarity that had guided him through countless dangerous situations. But this was different. This wasn't a simple matter of confronting a single aggressor. This was a web, complex and far-reaching, with innocent lives caught in its strands. You've got 24 hours to make your decision, Harrington said, rising from the couch. I'll be in touch. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back. Don't do anything stupid, Mr. Cole. You're not in the military anymore. There's no team to back you up, no government to protect you. You're just one man, alone, going up against forces you don't understand. Think very carefully about what you're willing to sacrifice. Then he was gone, leaving Marcus standing in his living room, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him like a physical force. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his darkened living room, thinking, planning, trying to see a way through the maze that Harrington had trapped him in. The logical choice was to cooperate, recant his statement, let Derek go free, and protect the people who had become important to him. It was the safe choice, the pragmatic choice. It was what any sensible person would do when faced with such overwhelming odds. But Marcus had never been sensible when it came to matters of right and wrong. He'd spent 20 years fighting against forces that seemed insurmountable, believing that the effort mattered even when victory seemed impossible. He'd watched friends die for principles that most people would have dismissed as naive idealism. He'd made sacrifices that still woke him up at night, choices that he would carry with him until the day he died. He wasn't going to start backing down now. The question was how to fight. Harrington was right about one thing. Marcus was alone. He didn't have the resources or the connections to take on a man like Harrington directly. A frontal assault would be suicide. And worse, it would put innocent people in danger. But there were other ways to fight. Ways that didn't require superior firepower or overwhelming force. Ways that relied on patience, strategy, and the one thing Marcus had learned to value above all else during his years in special operations: intelligence. He needed information. He needed to understand who Victor Harrington really was, what his operations involved, and where his vulnerabilities lay. He needed to find leverage, something that would make Harrington back off, something that would expose him to consequences he couldn't buy or bully his way out of. And he needed help. The next morning, Marcus made a phone call. "Detective Chen, this is Marcus Cole. We need to talk. I have information about a situation that's bigger than either of us realized." They met at a diner on the outskirts of town, a quiet place where they weren't likely to be observed. Detective Sarah Chen listened without interrupting as Marcus laid out everything that had happened, from Harrington's visit, to his threats, to the implications about Derek's true role. When he finished, Chen sat back in her booth, her face troubled. "Victor Harrington," she said. "That's a name that comes up in a lot of places it shouldn't. He's been on our radar for years, but we've never been able to make anything stick. He's got lawyers, connections, people in positions of power who owe him favors. Taking him down would require evidence that we've never been able to obtain." What kind of evidence? Financial records, testimony from witnesses, documentation of his illegal activities. The kind of thing that's very hard to get when the person you're investigating has unlimited resources to cover his tracks. Marcus nodded slowly. "What if I could get that evidence?" Chen looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "Harrington thinks I'm going to cooperate. He thinks I'm scared, that I'll do whatever he says to protect the people I care about. That's a vulnerability. If I play along, pretend to go along with his demands, I might be able to get close enough to gather the evidence you need. That's incredibly dangerous. If Harrington realizes what you're doing, he won't hesitate to make good on his threats." "I know, but it's also the only chance we have. If I just recant my statement and walk away, Derek goes free, Harrington's operation continues, and people keep getting hurt. I can't live with that." Chen studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You know what you're risking." "I know. And you're willing to do it anyway?" Marcus thought about Sophia, about the trust in her eyes when she'd hugged him. He thought about Tyler, about the progress the boy had made, the hope that had started to grow in him. He thought about Maria, about all the survivors at the community center, about every person who had ever looked to him for help. "Yes," he said, "I'm willing." Chen nodded slowly. "Okay, then let's figure out how to do this right." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus walked a tightrope between two worlds. On the surface, he played the role that Harrington expected, a defeated man cowed by threats, willing to do whatever was necessary to protect the people he cared about. He met with Harrington's representatives, agreed to their demands, and started the process of recanting his testimony. But underneath that surface, he was gathering information. Detective Chen introduced him to a small team of trusted officers who had been investigating Harrington for years. They briefed him on what they knew, which wasn't much, and what they suspected, which was extensive. Harrington's legitimate businesses were fronts for a variety of illegal operations, including money laundering, fraud, and possibly human trafficking. Derek Mills had been a key figure in these operations, using his position in the community to identify vulnerable people who could be exploited. Maria, they suspected, had been targeted deliberately. Her isolation, her fear, her undocumented status, all of it made her a perfect victim. If Derek hadn't been arrested, she might have eventually been drawn into Harrington's web in ways she couldn't have escaped from. The thought made Marcus's blood run cold, but gathering evidence against Harrington was proving difficult. The man was careful, paranoid, and had years of practice covering his tracks. Every lead seemed to dead end, every potential witness was either too scared to talk or had conveniently disappeared. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Tyler, The boy from the community center approached Marcus one afternoon with a troubled expression. "I need to tell you something," he said. "But you have to promise not to get mad." Marcus sat down on a bench, giving Tyler his full attention. "I promise." Tyler fidgeted, clearly struggling with whatever he needed to say. Finally, the words came out in a rush. "Before I came to the center, when I was still on the streets, I did some stuff I'm not proud of. Running errands for people, delivering packages, that kind of thing. I didn't know what was in the packages. I didn't want to know. I just needed the money." He looked up at Marcus, his eyes bright with shame and fear. "The man I worked for, his name was Victor. He had an office downtown in that big building on 5th Street. He never talked to me directly, but I heard things. I saw things. I know where he keeps his records. The real ones. Not the ones he shows to the cops and the accountants." Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate, but he kept his voice calm. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I heard what's happening. The other kids talk, and I listen. They say there's a bad man causing trouble for you, for Dr. Patterson, for the whole center. They say it's the same man I used to work for, and I thought, maybe I could help. Maybe I could make up for some of the bad things I did." Marcus looked at the boy, at the desperate hope in his eyes, and felt something catch in his chest. "Tyler, what you're suggesting is dangerous. If Harrington found out you were helping me, he wouldn't hesitate to hurt you. I know, but I owe you. You helped me when nobody else would. You didn't give up on me, even when I was a jerk. Let me do this. Let me help." It went against every instinct Marcus had to put a child in danger. But Tyler had information that could make all the difference, and the boy was determined to contribute. Turning him away would be an insult to his courage and his desire to make amends. "Okay," Marcus said finally. "Tell me everything you know." Tyler's information was detailed and specific. He knew the layout of Harrington's downtown office, the schedule of his security team, the location of a hidden safe where the real financial records were kept. He even knew the combination to the safe, a 6-digit code he'd seen Harrington enter during one of his errands. With this information, Marcus and Detective Chen developed a plan. It was risky, bordering on reckless, but it was also their best chance. The operation took place on a Thursday night. Marcus, wearing dark clothes and carrying a small bag of tools, slipped into Harrington's building through a service entrance that Tyler had identified. He moved through the darkened hallways with the silent precision of his training, avoiding security cameras, staying in the shadows. The office was on the 12th floor. Marcus picked the lock with hands that were steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Inside, the room was exactly as Tyler had described. A front office with expensive furniture and generic artwork, and behind a hidden panel, a small room containing the safe. The combination worked. Inside the safe, Marcus found exactly what they needed. Ledgers documenting years of illegal transactions, records of bribes paid to public officials, evidence of money laundering through shell companies, and most damning of all, a list of names and addresses, people who had been trafficked through Harrington's network, bought and sold like commodities. Marcus photographed everything, his heart pounding, his mind focused on the task. Then he replaced the documents exactly as he'd found them, closed the safe, and slipped out of the building the same way he'd entered. He was 3 blocks away before he allowed himself to breathe. The evidence Marcus gathered was more than enough for Detective Chen to obtain warrants. Within a week, federal agents joined the investigation, turning what had been a local matter into a RICO case that would bring down not just Harrington, but his entire operation. The arrests came on a Tuesday morning, coordinated raids across the city that swept up Harrington, Derrick, and dozens of their associates. Marcus watched the news coverage from his living room, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. It was over. The threat that had loomed over him, over Maria and Sophia, over the children at the community center, had been neutralized. People who had been afraid could start to heal. People who had been exploited could begin to rebuild their lives. but there was more work to do. There was always more work. In the weeks that followed, Marcus threw himself into his role at the community centre with renewed energy. The publicity from the Harrington case brought attention to the centre's work, and donations started pouring in. New programs were launched, more staff was hired, the building was expanded to accommodate the growing need. Dr. Patterson approached him one day with a proposal. "We're creating a new position," she said, "Director of Youth Services. It would involve overseeing all our programs for children, developing new initiatives, training staff. I can't think of anyone better suited for the job." Marcus started to refuse, to list all the reasons why he wasn't qualified, why someone else would be better. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of Tyler's face when he'd offered to help. Maybe it was the thought of Sophia, now thriving in her new school, still visiting him every week with her mother to share cookies and stories. Maybe it was simply the realization that running away from responsibility was no longer an option. "Okay," he said, "I'll do it." The months that followed were the busiest of Marcus's life. He threw himself into his new role with the same intensity he'd brought to his military career. But this time, the battles were different. He fought against bureaucracy and budget constraints, against the systemic failures that let so many children fall through the cracks. He built relationships with schools and social services, creating networks of support that extended far beyond the community center's walls. And always, he showed up for the kids. Tyler was his first real success story, a boy who had transformed from an angry, distrustful street kid into a confident young man with plans for the future. When Tyler graduated from middle school with honors, Marcus sat in the audience and felt something that might have been pride, though he couldn't quite bring himself to name it. Sophia remained a constant presence in his life, a reminder of where this journey had begun. She visited him regularly, sometimes with her mother, sometimes alone, always bringing stories about school and friends and the life she was building. Maria had enrolled in community college, studying to become a social worker. She wanted to help other women who had been through what she had experienced, to guide them toward the same hope she had found. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Marcus sat on the porch of his house, the same porch where Sophia had first appeared, terrified and desperate. The neighborhood had changed over the years. The Hendersons had moved away, replaced by a young family with twin girls, who reminded Marcus of Sophia at that age. Mrs. Patterson had passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, leaving behind a legacy of kindness and homemade cookies. Maria's old house, the yellow one with the broken fence, had been renovated and sold to a couple who had no idea of its history. The fence was fixed now, the yard was well maintained, and the curtains were always open, letting in the light. Maria herself was inside Marcus's house, preparing dinner with Sophia, who was home from college for the weekend. Their voices drifted out through the open windows, mingling with the sounds of the evening, laughter and conversation, and the simple joy of being together. Marcus listened to them and smiled. 10 years ago, he had been a broken man, hiding from the world, convinced that his useful days were behind him. He had built walls around himself, determined to disappear into anonymity and isolation. But a little girl had run to him for help, and everything had changed. He thought about the journey, all the moments that had led him here. The fear in Sophia's eyes that first day, and the trust that had replaced it. The courage Maria had shown in rebuilding her life. Tyler's transformation from angry child to confident man. Dr. Patterson's guidance. Detective Chen's partnership. All the children at the community center, all the lives touched, all the small victories that added up to something larger. It wasn't the life he had planned. It wasn't anything like the life he had imagined for himself when he was young and believed he would spend his days in service to his country. But it was better. It was real. It was his. "Marcus!" Sophia called from inside. "Dinner's ready!" He stood, his bad leg protesting with its familiar ache, and walked toward the sound of their voices, toward home. The night was warm, filled with the sounds of summer, crickets chirping, children playing in the distance, the gentle rustle of leaves in the oak tree that had stood in the yard for as long as anyone could remember. Marcus sat on the porch step, a cup of coffee in his hands that had grown cold while he was lost in thought. Maria came out and settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "Just thinking." "About what?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "About how different things could have been. If Sophia hadn't found me that day, if I hadn't answered the door, if I'd just stayed inside and told myself it wasn't my problem." Maria nodded slowly. "I think about that too. The what-ifs. They used to terrify me. And now? Now I just feel grateful. For you. For Sophia. For everything we've built." She reached over and took his hand. "You know, Sophia asked me once why you helped us. She wanted to know what made you different from all the other people who turned away. What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth. That I didn't know. That some people have something inside them that makes them act when others freeze. That you're one of those people." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not special. I just did what needed to be done." "That's what makes you special, Marcus. You see what needs to be done and you do it. You don't make excuses or look for reasons why it's not your responsibility. You just act." She squeezed his hand. "That's rare. That's beautiful. And that's why I love you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with significance. They had never said them before, not explicitly. Their relationship had evolved slowly, naturally, from gratitude to friendship to something deeper, something that neither of them had expected or sought out. Marcus looked at her, at this woman who had been through so much and emerged stronger for it, who had rebuilt her life from nothing and dedicated herself to helping others do the same. He thought about all the reasons why this was complicated, all the ways their history could cast shadows on their future, and then he thought about how she made him feel, how her presence had become essential to him, how the thought of a life without her was unbearable. "I love you too," he said. Maria smiled, that smile that had grown more frequent over the years, replacing the fear and wariness that had once defined her expression. "I know," she said. "I was just waiting for you to figure it out." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind he'd forgotten he was capable of. Then he leaned over and kissed her, soft and gentle, a promise and a declaration and a beginning all at once. From inside the house, Sophia's voice rang out, "Finally!" They broke apart, both of them blushing, to find Sophia standing in the doorway with her phone in her hand and a huge grin on her face. "I've been waiting years for this," she said. "I'm telling Tyler and Dr. Patterson and everyone at the center." "Sophia," Maria started. But the girl was already gone, her footsteps pounding up the stairs as she rushed to share the news. Marcus and Maria looked at each other and burst out laughing. "Well," Maria said, "I guess it's official now." "I guess so," Marcus agreed. They sat together on the porch, hand in hand, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but full of promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The wedding was held at the community center, the only place that felt right. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. But the building was full of people who had been touched by Marcus and Maria's story. Tyler served as best man, looking distinguished in a suit he'd bought with his first real paycheck. Sophia was maid of honor, beaming with a pride and joy that seemed to light up the entire room. Dr. Patterson officiated, having gotten ordained specifically for the occasion. "Love comes to us in many forms," she said, her voice warm and steady. "Sometimes it's the love we expect, the love we're taught to look for. And sometimes it's a surprise, born from circumstances we never anticipated, growing in soil we didn't plant." She looked at Marcus and Maria, standing hand in hand before her. What these two have built together is a testament to the power of choice. They chose to help when others turned away. They chose to heal when it would have been easier to stay broken. They chose each other, not because it was convenient or simple, but because love, real love, is about choosing someone every single day, even when it's hard. Marcus looked at Maria, at her beautiful face and bright eyes, and felt a peace settle over him that he'd never experienced before. All the years of fighting, all the pain and loss and darkness had led him here, to this moment, to this woman, to this life. Do you, Marcus Cole, take Maria Reyes to be your wife? To love and cherish, to support and protect, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Marcus said, his voice steady. And do you, Maria Reyes, take Marcus Cole to be your husband? To love and cherish, to support and protect, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Maria said, tears streaming down her face. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride. He did, thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. When they broke apart, Sophia launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around them in a fierce hug. We're a real family now, she said, her voice muffled against Marcus's chest. We always were, Marcus replied. This just makes it official. The reception that followed was joyous and chaotic, full of laughter and dancing, and the kind of celebration that comes from people who truly care about each other. Tyler gave a speech that had everyone in tears. Sophia performed a song she'd written herself. Dr. Patterson danced with an enthusiasm that belied her age. Late in the evening, as the party wound down, Marcus found himself standing alone at the edge of the room, watching his family and friends. Maria was talking with some of the staff from the center, her face animated and happy. Sophia was dancing with Tyler, both of them laughing at their own clumsiness. Detective Chen appeared at his side, a glass of champagne in her hand. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to be left alone, she said. Marcus smiled. Things change. They do. For what it's worth, I'm glad you didn't stay in your shell. A lot of people's lives are better because you came out of it. A lot of people's lives are better because a lot of people worked together, Marcus corrected. I'm just one piece of it. Chen shrugged. Maybe. But you're an important piece. The piece that got the whole thing started. She raised her glass. To you, Marcus, and to all the scared little girls who have the courage to ask for help, and all the retired soldiers who have the heart to give it. Marcus raised his own glass and clinked it against hers. To second chances, he said. To second chances, she agreed. They drank together, watching the celebration continue, grateful for the paths that had led them here. The years that followed the wedding were some of the best of Marcus's life. He and Maria bought a house together, a bigger place with a yard and room for guests. Sophia came home from college every break, filling the house with noise and energy and love. Tyler became a regular presence at family dinners, eventually bringing his own girlfriend, and later his wife. The community center continued to grow, eventually spawning satellite locations across the state. Marcus stepped back from day-to-day operations, handing the reins to Tyler and a new generation of leaders he had trained. But he stayed involved, serving on the board, mentoring young staff members, showing up whenever he was needed. His relationship with Maria deepened with each passing year, their love growing stronger as they weathered the ordinary challenges of life together. They learned each other's habits and quirks, found ways to support each other's dreams, built a partnership based on mutual respect and endless affection. Sophia grew into a remarkable woman, carrying forward the lessons she had learned into her own career in public service. When she announced her engagement to a young man she'd met in law school, Marcus walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes and pride in his heart. "Thank you," Sophia whispered to him before the ceremony, "for everything, for being my dad when I needed one." Marcus couldn't speak, so he just hugged her tight and hoped she understood. On the 10th anniversary of that first encounter, the whole extended family gathered for a celebration. The original players were all there, Marcus and Maria, Sophia and her husband, Tyler and his family, Dr. Patterson, who was now 85 but still sharp as ever. And alongside them were dozens of others, people whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of one moment of courage. Sophia stood up to give a toast, her belly swelling with the first grandchild that Marcus and Maria would welcome. 10 years ago, I was a scared little girl who ran to a stranger for help, she said. I didn't know if anyone would listen. I didn't know if anyone would care, but someone did. Someone answered. And because of that, I'm standing here today, surrounded by family and friends, about to bring a new life into the world. She raised her glass. To Marcus, who taught me that heroism isn't about superpowers or grand gestures. It's about showing up. It's about caring. It's about being the kind of person who makes the world a little bit better just by being in it. Everyone raised their glasses. To Marcus. He looked around at all of them, these people who had become his family, his purpose, his home. He thought about the journey, all the pain and struggle and unexpected joy. He thought about the scared, broken man he had been and the person he had become. To all of us, he said, his voice rough with emotion, to second chances, to showing up, to love. They drank together, their voices rising in celebration, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange. Another day was ending, another chapter was closing, but the story wasn't over. It never really was. Because every ending was also a beginning, and every act of courage created ripples that spread out forever, touching lives in ways that could never be fully known or measured. Marcus had learned that lesson the hard way, but he had learned it well, and he would spend the rest of his life teaching it to others. The baby was born on a Tuesday, a healthy girl with her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubborn chin. They named her Hope because that was what she represented, the future, bright and unwritten, full of possibility. Marcus held her for the first time in the hospital, this tiny creature who had no idea of the story that had led to her existence. She was so small, so fragile, so perfect. He looked at her and saw all the children he had helped over the years, all the lives that had been changed, all the hope that had been kindled. "Hello, Hope," he whispered. "I'm your grandpa, and I'm going to tell you a story." She looked up at him with unfocused newborn eyes, and he smiled. Once upon a time, there was a man who thought his life was over. He'd been a soldier, fighting in faraway places, and he had seen terrible things. When he came home, he was broken and alone, and he didn't think he would ever be whole again. Hope made a small sound, and Marcus adjusted his hold on her. But then, one day, a little girl came running up to him, crying and scared. She needed help, and he was the only one around. So he helped her. It wasn't anything special, really. He just did what needed to be done. He paused, remembering. But that one act, that one moment of choosing to help instead of looking away, changed everything. It led to friendships, to love, to a whole new life. It led to your grandmother and your mother and eventually to you. Hope yawned, apparently unimpressed by the narrative. "The moral of the story," Marcus said, "is that you never know when a single choice will change your whole life. You never know when a moment of courage will set everything in motion. So when you see someone who needs help, don't look away. Don't tell yourself it's not your problem. Show up, care, act." He leaned down and kissed her tiny forehead. "That's what your grandpa learned, and that's what he's going to teach you." Sophia appeared in the doorway, tired but radiant. "You're already telling her stories?" "Starting early," Marcus said. "Lots of wisdom to pass on." Sophia smiled and came to sit beside him, looking down at her daughter. "She's beautiful, isn't she? She's perfect." They sat together in comfortable silence, 3 generations connected by love and history and the choices that had brought them to this moment. Outside the hospital window, the city went about its business, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, moments of crisis and moments of grace occurring every second. Somewhere out there, someone was crying for help. Somewhere out there, someone was deciding whether to answer. Marcus hoped they would choose to show up, because that was how the world got better, not through grand gestures or superhuman feats, but through ordinary people making the choice to care. One moment at a time, one act of courage at a time, one life changed at a time. That was the lesson of his story. That was the legacy he would leave behind. And as he sat there, holding his granddaughter in his arms, surrounded by the family that never should have existed but somehow did, Marcus knew that it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything, the end of a long journey, the beginning of a new one. And the story continued, as it always would, passed down from generation to generation, inspiring acts of courage in people who would never know where the impulse came from, carrying forward the ripples of one man's choice to show up when a scared little girl ran to him for help. That was the power of compassion. That was the gift of presence. That was the miracle of hope. And it started, as all miracles do, with a single step forward into the unknown.